I'm Al Filreis, and this is PoemTalk at the Writer's House, where I have the pleasure of convening three friends in the world of contemporary poetry and poetics to collaborate on a close but not too close reading of a poem. The four of us are here today to talk about Michael McClure's Ghost Tantras, a book self-published in 1964 and long out of print until City Lights republished it, I think, Jerry, as late as 2013, maybe, recently. Penn Sound's McClure page includes various readings of the sections of Ghost Tantras, and we have chosen three to discuss today, sections 39, 49, and 51. Now, the performances of sections 39 and 51 we'll hear just as they were recorded in a studio and became part of Rock Drill CD number 9. But for section 49, we are going to listen to a 4-minute and 40-second recording in which Michael McClure first recently recalls the reading of this poem to 4 lions at the San Francisco Zoo, and then includes the recording of McClure and the lions made back in 1966. Oh boy, I think we should start with that one. Talking about 49, how could we? There would be like, what is it in the room? The elephant in the room would be the lion in the room, not talking about it. So
yeah, although the one reference to lion itself is
in the other poem,
51. But then,
yeah, let's talk about the machine and then get to the lion. So
okay.
in 51, machines are referred to twice. Jonathan, you first. We are served by machines making satins of sound. And then the machines are too dull when we are lion poems that move and breathe. What do you start us off with that? Say anything, then we'll turn to Jerry.
I mean, in the first reference to machines, the word served implies a sort of hierarchy of use, right? Machines being under us or beneath us,
right,
having a sort of use value to us. In the second reference, machine or machination is sort of, we exceed machination or the capacity to be regulated through machines. And so I guess the tension that I'm observing is between sort of use and excess. And I'm not quite sure how to reconcile that with respect to...
Well, it's a good start, though. Jerry, the line in all caps after the reference to the lion poems is, in fact, a lion poem-like line, when we grew, which is in fact what he says in the lion poem. So what do you make of this, the machines and the reference to that compound noun lion poems?
Well, it's all of a piece with the mammalian side of his manifesto.
Right.
So I mean, we are all mammals, and he becomes a mammal patriot. I mean, that's part of the context that he creates for himself and for us in writing these ghost tantras, which are really animal tantras, beast tantras. Machines that come in at the beginning, at the end, are too dull. Mm-hmm. When we are lion poems.
When we are not when we write lion poems or perform them, but when we are lion poems.
When we are lion poems.
Yeah.
I think the when is so important, because I think this is a very intentional when. This when actually gives us quite a lot of agency. I don't think it's a random when. We are lion poems, and it matches with that manifesto, that message. When we have a choice, we have agency, a choice to really embody and to recognize. The agency is both. It's a mental act of recognition of ourselves, but it's also an embodiment, a living of this animalness, of this lionness, of this poemness altogether.
So, Jonathan, back to you on the machines. What more can we say now that we've heard a little more about what McClure is after? Where do the machines fit in this ideology?
I mean, the way that I have been sort of reading technology into McClure is, I mean, language is prima facie a form of technology, but specifically one of regulation. You standardize languages so that people have to fit within a certain confine of expression. And I mean, I really like the point that you made about the when, because it does sort of indicate a very specific choice to exceed that sort of regulation. And so I guess with respect to the machines that are brought in, particularly with the latter half of this stanza, the machines are too dull. It seems to suggest that that form of regulation in technology that standardizes us, whether it's language or something else, is not enough for our mammalian patriot bodies, because we exceed that. And yeah.
You did it.
I did it.
Oh, that was really fantastic, Jerry. Let's get to 49, to the famous roar poem, and you can ignore the question, but I want to lead us in by saying this. In response to Ghost Tantras, Dennis Hopper, countercultural actor, hippie guy, said, without McClure's roar, there would have been no 60s. Now that's kind of a silly blurb statement, but it sounds about right. Anyway, as a contemporary of McClure's, you wouldn't have gone into the San Francisco Zoo to perform with the lions, but I could tell, listening to this again all these years later, just a few minutes ago, watching your expression, you just thought this was an amazing thing for him to have done. You responded, your face suggested awe at this thing that he had pulled off.
Well, also, as a poet, it brings all sorts of things together. And the fact that he actually goes out there, with the lions. And the lions, by the way, are wonderful.
They're great, even when the poem's over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really beautifully coordinated between him and the lions. And I didn't remember in retrospect how powerful his voice was in that, because usually, Michael reads in a very soft voice that would seem to belie all of the grars, and without the lions,
right?
Are rather, peaceful and placid.
That's right.
But with the lions there, it's as if he takes that lion energy unto himself, and it's also, there are various contexts in which he works, and others of us, also. But it's in Technicians of the Sacred, in that part of the book where I include, contemporary or modernist experimental works as analogs to the tribal and oral poetry that forms most of the book. I have instances of traditional sound poetry, poems without words, that go back into various cultures, including the European, or in the glossolalia of religious performances, and then into the work of early modern experimentalists like Hugo Ball and Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich with Dada, or Kurt Schwitters in Germany in the 1920s, with the great sound poem, the Ur-Sonata. But then it struck me too that that both of those, of whom Michael was as aware as I was, create a larger context. They're not mammal patriots, but the Ur-Sonata is Ur, in the sense of getting back to the primeval, right, to something, something basic in the human that we may be in danger of losing. So both Ball and Schwitters are seeing themselves and seeing the poetry without words, the sound poetry, as having some kind of experiential religious significance. McClure, as far as I knew him, not really so, but the poetry contains all of that.
I mean, certainly 49 puts him in the mode and tradition you just described, right? So this is a great way to rediscover or re-radicalize Michael McClure.
If you read just this poem in isolation, you see a very common trick, sort of. McClure is teaching us a few words. He's teaching us a few animal words right in the second line. Drive, Jure, we have that one. And then a few lines down, the multitude of gra, whooshes and silences we recognize already, but gra is another one, right? We're learning these words. What was so amazing about his communion with the lions, that communication, is that the lions already know these words. When we read them, we're being taught something new. he's communing with those lines. They're responding for seconds and seconds and seconds after the end of the poem because they already speak this language and they recognize that he is speaking directly to them, which I think is just so beautiful. And it makes a very sharp connection for me to what you were mentioning, Jerry, about the German modernists and the Dada movement is a sort of anti-pedagogical, this is not a lesson that I'm teaching you, and that contradicts what I just said, right? Oh, this is a trick in poetry to teach you these new words. It's not teaching, it's leading by example. It's performing, it's living.
No, I want to turn to Jonathan, but just insert this thing that Jerry Rothenberg is always saying in one way or other, which is that let's go to find poetry to a place where poets are doing poetry rather than sitting around talking about it. And if you go to those places, the connections will start to be made. Making poetry is really all you need to do, and the understanding of poetry will come from making. McClure is clearly interested in this idea that poems don't have to be images. A poem whose sound makes an image in the mind is also making an image. This is a way of tweaking early modernism, which was very image-obsessed, such as with the Imagists and so forth. So, Jonathan, where do you want to go?
I was struck when Jerry was speaking a little bit earlier, and you referenced sort of glossolalia and sort of speaking in tongues, glossolalia being the sense that a poem or some sort of religious speech act is possessing the body and coming out without one's control. And there is a sense that you do get that with McClure reading some of these poems, especially with the words that are stretched and sort of distorted outside of their, like, I don't know, traditional semantic order. It becomes this really interesting sort of act of performance. He's interested in poems that imprint on the body with their rhythms, and you can tell when he's speaking and shifting his rhythms in this way that he's sort of inscribing himself with this rhythm in a really cool. He calls it a devotional act, but I wanted to sort of pick up on that sort of glossolalic element. But also, I mean, even just the tone. If you look at the poem that we just read, 49, it's sort of split into two. You have sort of standardized English at the top, and then you have that mammalian language at the bottom. And when we listened to this recording, the standardized English almost sounded like a preaching to me. And so I guess this is me trying to weave together the conversation that you brought in and then also this conversation about glossolalia and where that leaves a poem that seems to not want to deal with mimetic images. Does that sort of necessitate the use of a glossolalic language? Does it necessitate the use of sort of a corporeal language? It's a question that's an open-ended one that I don't think is easily answerable. But.
Yeah, he's moving also, it seems to me, toward music. Because music within this context is a poetry, without words. So if we go back to Schwitters again, Schwitters writes Ursonate. So it takes sonata, the musical term, because there are no words in it. There are sounds, and at the end of 49, we're just into the domain of sounds now. McClure's choice is to grar and extended grar and shortened grar and there he is performing a tantra with the lions.
And not a music without ideas, not a music without meaning. In fact, we were talking about this before we started recording earlier today. Jerry, you like to quote Tristan Tzara saying, "Thought is made in the mouth." That's what's happening here. It would be wrong to read Michael McClure as, just growling.
Oh, no. Michael knows a lot. Michael, in my interactions, with him, first it was Michael, whom I barely knew at that time, who, in response to Technicians of the Sacred, connected me or connected it with what was going on. He said in San Francisco at that time. I was living in New York. Things had opened up on the West Coast. by the late 1960s. Michael recognized for me, what Technicians of the Sacred was doing, and then I had a later interaction with him around more traditional European or international poetry through Romanticism. Michael was an unabashed romanticism and lover of Shelley and so on, and more than I was at that period. And when I came to do, finally a gathering of romantic and post-romantic poetry
In Poems for the Millennium, right?
Yeah, Michael was a great supporter.
Yeah.
In that, and
This is why we do PoemTalk, if I may. I asked you, I gave you a list of 40 poets we haven't covered yet in PoemTalk, and you picked Michael McClure. One reason was maybe he's not well enough known, but I think underlying that, and we can talk about that later, is this idea that we may be miscategorizing someone like McClure. And already in this conversation, I think we've done a pretty good job of alerting people to the various connections. Selena, I want to turn to the Marilyn Monroe poem, 39, and invite you to say anything you like to get us started on talking about that. Today thou hast passed the dark barrier.
I actually want to jump straight to the end because, as always, it fits perfectly with something Jerry just mentioned. It's about music, and when I read this the first time, I tried 3 different things I was telling Jonathan earlier. I tried reading these poems silently to myself, I tried reading them out loud, and then I listened to the recordings. And when I read this one out loud, I ended up singing them because these lion poems, this end right here is a coda. You can feel this form. This is a musical coda. It's different. The tone is different. It resolves differently than the rest of the poem.
And you said singing, meaning you were home preparing and you did this aloud.
I did it. I did it aloud many times. Should I do? I'm going to
do
the last time.
Would you do it?
Don't laugh at me. I'm going to read.
No, there's
just
no
the
laughing
last
possible. We're in the room with
lines.
Jerry Rothenberg. He's done some singing in his time,
Okay,
so he's
good.
not going to be embarrassed.
And I'm not a singer, but I think these last few lines are just so beautiful. After farewell, when you get to this last section, this is the coda. I swear it is. Mordrarun rahor 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 Ve'audar norgaror.
That was marvelous.
Thank you. And it's very, very different when I listen to the recording. I thought, wow, we have very different interpretations, but I stand by this because when you read the entire thing, I feel such a shift that this is a very respectful and peaceful and mournful resolution to this poem.
Jonathan, you got to be speechless after that. But
Yeah, I'm not going to sing for you.
I'm not asking you to sing, but farewell, perfect mammal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, farewell, perfect.
It's doing something right away. He wrote these poems in 1964. She dies in 1962. For all we know, he wrote it on August 6, 19th, the day she died. But he's already enlarging the category of what she was, which was, of course, the big problem that Marilyn Monroe, one of the big problems she suffered from was a certain narrowing of the categories for her. So how do you read that, farewell, perfect mammal?
I mean, as an occasional poem, there's something lamentary to it, of course, but that it starts with the name makes this elegy begin almost apostrophically, like it's an invocation and animation of Marilyn Monroe. And I was interested in not so much how this elegy seemed to say goodbye, but how it seemed to bring her back, especially with this discussion of a Malian language and sort of the singing that we just listened to. One thing that I picked up on, and this is in the introduction to my book, but McClure mentions that these are his personal poems, but that you can read them too if you'd like. And I think what's really fantastic about the way in which the poems stretch language is that they can become your personal poems too by bringing them up and by embodying them. And there's something kind of revolutionary about making an elegy putting an elegy in that light because it seems to suggest a constant animation of Monroe. And so I think to shy away from answering your question...
Animation. You didn't shy away. You finally answered it, I think. Animation.
Are you with respect to Farewell, Perfect Mammal?
Or the earlier lines, warm bodies, full lips. Now, these are plural. The lips can be plural on a singular person. Hips also, there are two of them typically. And laughing eyes, plural eyes, there are two of them. But warm bodies suggests that it's not just about Marilyn Monroe's body, is that she has joined the other bodies. And I think, Jerry, I'm going to turn to you. I think this resonates with a line from the preface to the new edition of Ghost Tantras that makes me think of this, quoting McClure. I believe that a poem I make is part of myself like an organ or spirit body, and these poem tantras are becoming a body and growing up, having a life of their own. So we have lots of bodies going around, including the embodying that he thinks about when he's making poems. Jerry, your thoughts on the Marilyn Monroe poem?
It's interesting. There were a number of poems written on the death of Marilyn Monroe, or I particularly think of the famous one by Frank O'Hara. But Michael is incorporating it into the body of the Ghost Tantras. I mean, this is already number 39 in the series, and he's bringing her into the world of the mammal patriots. But also, celebrating the sexuality of the image, the warm bodies, all of which, makes her perfect mammal. So it's in this physical presence which may have spiritual overtones, but it's a physical presence, and he's really, bringing that across. This is, Marilyn, the perfect mammal. Mm-hmm. We are imperfect mammals. But she has achieved perfect mammal status. However seriously or not you take that.
Right. Well, Selena takes the coda very seriously, so I want to end our discussion about that poem by returning to you, Selena. So how does the coda function? So it seems like I think you're suggesting that he's done this work of elegizing and now he's sending her off to a place that can be characterized by this music that he makes in his Ghost Tantras. Does that make sense?
I think that does make sense because there's also a shift between farewell, perfect mammal, and fare thee well. And I want to draw everyone's attention just for a minute to the pronouns in this particular poem and in all of them, actually. I have yet to find any third-person pronouns anywhere, and I'm sure they're somewhere, and I haven't found any, but looking through this entire collection, I and you are everywhere. We is everywhere. We have the possessives as well. And then we have thou and thee. Mm-hmm. Thou and thee, using the second person. But this is, again, this communion, just like with the lions. I think the musical side, this coda, is a farewell spoken or sung directly to her spirit.
Mm. It was Bruce Conner, the artist, who first went to the zoo with him, and they were recording something else, another thing for another project. And then I believe they got the idea to go into the place with the lions, it was an audio recording first, the Conner audio. Then later, and you'll have to try to help me remember the name of this, but this really wonderful guy who created this television series called Poetry USA, and this was an episode, and so they went back with cameras, and I'm guessing since it was only 2 years later that the same 4 lions were there, roughly speaking, and they did this. They did an encore basically. But I wonder if Zach would be willing to cue up the part of the poem where he turns to the second person, you. And the poem was not written with lions in mind necessarily, right? But suddenly he's speaking to the lions, and they respond, "Oh, you are heavier and dimmer than you knew. They come in after the word silences. The trillionic multitude of gra, vooshes, and silences cue the lions, and then, oh, you are heavier and dimmer. It's the second person coming alive.
Thy trillionic multitude of gra, vooshes, and silences, oh, you are heavier and dimmer than you knew, and more solid and full of pleasure. Gra!
At that moment, you becomes very, very pointed, and it becomes so much more part of this this animalism. It's quite a brilliant use of the second person. What we're going to do now, we could talk forever about this, but I'd like to get final thoughts from each of you about this. So I'm going to start with Jonathan. A final thought?
I think one thing that has struck me just reading these poems multiple times is the way in which, at the very beginning of the reading experience, the stretching of these words might seem like nonsense. Upon sort of a devotion to sort of reading the poems, a practice of actually looking at them and taking them seriously for what they are, that perception that these grar noises are nonsensical actually shifts quite significantly, and you realize that there's a huge amount of sense invested into these distortions. It does involve a lot of sort of moves on the reader's part. You really do have to tinker with it. But I think to close, at least from my perspective, I gained a lot of appreciation for McClure by giving him the devotion that I think he deserved as a reader. And so I think that's a larger comment about nonsense writing and sense writing in particular, but that's where I think I will rest.
Amen. Well, that's a great reminder. Jerry Rothenberg, final thought?
Oh, with Michael McClure is a lover of poetry, and it was a great pleasure and revelation to see how this was embodied in his work, and and the range of it, which was not limitless, but quite large, and he lived it, and I don't think the mammalian consciousness is necessarily going to have any long-lasting effects, but it's part of an image of a poet and poetry that he creates in his life, and worth an extraordinary amount.
Selena, final thought.
My final thought is actually a plug for something everyone should listen to, and it's mentioned in the introduction to this 2013 edition of McClure's work, and it is Brahms from 1896, the Vier Ernste Gesänge, the 4 serious songs, especially the third one, in connection with this Marilyn Monroe with number 39. The third one, the title is O Tod, wie bitter du bist, O Death, how bitter you are. And they're really, really beautiful.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Okay, my final thought is to quote McClure on that whole story about Bruce Conner and the San Francisco Zoo, and then they went back. Here's what he says about that experience, that we how lucky we are that they recorded this, that we heard at the beginning of this episode. The newly published first edition of my book is in my back pocket. They're at the zoo. He's speaking in the present tense about that time. He happens to have Ghost Tantras in his back pocket, and through a lucky event, we end up in the Lion House, and I yell this Tantra to the 4 main males of the building. They roar back with me, and we sing it together. The 5 of us are deeply pleased. Also, I am profoundly shaken. And then shaken again when Bruce plays back the tape he made with his high-fidelity machine. And I've heard several witnesses at parties and gatherings. When Bruce Conner would have people over, he would put this recording on with a high-fidelity machine. In other words, I imagine loud with a lot of bass. And I can just imagine them all shaken by it. Quite amazing.